All right, it is 1 after. I tell you what, we will just go ahead and get started. Since we are recording today, I will make sure to make this available to everyone. Before we get into today's webinar, I just want to welcome you all. This is our new monthly webinar series focused on brownfield redevelopment and downtown revitalization in Kentucky. This series will feature a variety of presentations and panels, and really intended to help attendees learn about available resources, specifically for brownfield redevelopment and downtown revitalization. These webinars are intended to connect underserved communities throughout the Commonwealth with redevelopment resources, technical assistance, new funding opportunities, and inspirational stories of success throughout Kentucky. This series is one of many new opportunities planned as part of a new partnership between the University of Kentucky's Community and Economic Development Initiative of Kentucky and the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet's Department of Environmental Protection Brownfield Program. So today's webinar will feature a panel of area development district staff, and we're going to discuss brownfield redevelopment. But before we get into any introductions, just a couple housekeeping items here before we jump into it. We are recording these webinars and are making those available on our CEDIK YouTube video page, our CEDIK page. And if you have registered and I have your email, once we have those ready and uploaded, I will send out an email providing the link. So you'll have access to the recording after the fact. And I'll also share any links for previous recordings that we may have done, including last month's first webinar, really focused on brownfields for beginners. But before we get into introductions, I also want to sort of invite you to join us at our upcoming webinar, where essentially the revitalization long game. It's going to be a great webinar. We're going to be hearing from folks from Beattyville, Kentucky, and they're going to be sharing the story, really a 15-year story of downtown revitalization and redevelopment that's been capped off with a recently awarded cleanup grant, brownfield cleanup grant for a historic building in their downtown. So we're really going to sort of hear about the long game as it relates to how Beattyville is approaching this. One other thing, as we get into the webinar, you'll notice a Q&A function on your end. If you have any questions as you get moving through, or as we get moving through the webinar, please feel free to include those in the Q&A. And near the end of the webinar, we will circle back and try to address or work through as many of those as we can. If there are any that are specifically related to brownfields questions, I do believe that we may have. I'm looking through the list now, and we do have staff, at least a staff member from the state. So if there are questions that we need to direct to them, we may sort of allow that to happen there at the end as well. So Kirsten, I see you in the attendee, just a heads up there. So I am really excited about this webinar today. Like I said, we've got a great panel of area development district staff. And as we were thinking about this series, our area development districts really came to mind because in many ways, they support a number of communities in the regions that they are tasked with serving. And in many cases, they also are working through brownfield programs, not only on behalf of communities, but as a way to sort of organize and bring multiple communities together. They often provide capacity for grant writing. They really do a lot of things. And if you're not working with your local area development district, I would most certainly invite you to do so. But before we get into the panel discussion here, I want to kind of open it up to our panelists today to provide a short introduction of who they are, where they're working, and if there are any projects that they may want to highlight before we get into our conversation today. And Susanna, I'm gonna turn it over to you first for an introduction.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
A little bit. It's a little low, but
sorry, I don't know what to do to make it better. I am Susanna Cornett from the Cumberland Valley Area Development District. We are based in London, Kentucky, and we have 8 counties in our district. One of the counties in our district is Harlan County, which was to some degree ground zero for the coal mining industry in Kentucky for a number of decades. And as I'm sure you're aware, most of that industry has left the state. And we're left with a lot of sites that are not amenable to redevelopment right away. So when we were thinking about writing an application for an assessment grant through EPA, Brownfield assessment, when we were looking around for the properties that we would need to identify in the application, what came to mind first was the area of what is called the Tri-Cities, which is Cumberland, Benham, and Lynch in Harlan County. The 3 towns are separate but very close together, which is why they are called that. And Lynch and Benham were both started by coal companies, and Cumberland was a market town adjacent initially. The towns, especially Lynch, have really, Benham, have really spent a lot of time getting themselves together to turn their sites into a tourist attraction, into something that highlights their history and the coal industry. There's an area called Portal 31, which is an actual coal mine that you can tour. And across the road from that are a lot of other structures and property that were initially a part of that site. So we have included that in our brownfields application, and we're in the process of doing assessments now. And we're working toward, we hope, a cleanup application either this fall or next year. And it definitely has the potential to have a strong economic role in the community once what is envisioned for that property is completed. It will take a while, but it's very encouraging. So that's what we're trying to do with our grant. We were awarded a $500,000 grant.
That is great news, Suzanne, and thank you for that great introduction. We're going to circle back at some point, and we're going to talk about that application process and what it took to pull that off, and perhaps what could have made it a little more efficient or perhaps a little more impactful as you all have started navigating that. I'm going to turn it over to Brendan to do an introduction if he's still with us here. I know Blake just sent me a message. He had to step away just for one moment. But Brendan, mind unmuting and doing a little introduction?
Can you hear me? Hello?
I can, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
My name is Brendan Kearney, and I work at the Lake Cumberland Area Development District, which is based in Russell Springs. And I'm pretty new, so I'm still learning and everything, which, I mean, I think a lot of people know in this area of work, you can work for 10 years and still be learning a lot. But I took over for a lady that knew a ton of stuff about brownfields. So I was lucky in that. But like I said, I'm still learning. I'll try to answer and help and be a good panelist all I can, but I don't know, I might be a little bit limited. But our main project since I've been here, I didn't write the grant. I'm just helping out, administering it, and like I said, learning. But it's called the Cumberland Brownfield Coalition, and it's based in Cumberland County. Burkesville is the county seat and everything. And if everybody can see the screen, there's one of the main properties that we wanted to look at. I think that's 404 Courthouse Square. But that property right there, one of the main things that the coalition wanted to do, which is the coalitions between the city and the county, everybody got together and they're all invested in trying to clean up sites and get everything going in the redevelopment of on the economic side mainly. But this was a $300,000 grant. We've spent about 80% of it, which has entailed, I'd say, probably 12 to 15 phase ones, about 4 or 5 phase twos, a couple of structural surveys. I think we had a geological survey on the next slide if you've got it on the picture. But this one specifically, like I said, they wanted to focus on the redevelopment on the economic side, and they hired a planning consultant who came in and toured the city and toured the brownfield sites that we'd assessed, kind of give his opinion on steps to take, but planning basically. And this site was listed as a catalyst site, how he described it, where you focus on one main area, which this would be a perfect area on the square right here, and kind of branch off and plan around one central thing. And this was an old hotel, actually. You can't really see on the picture, but in the windows there's all these little paintings of people who would stay at a hotel way back in the day. And they turned it into a office for the county attorney, I think. And we assessed that, and there were some things that popped up just because of its age that could have been wrong with it, but it ended up getting a clean bill of health, I believe. But do you have the next picture?
I sure do.
Okay. I just sent 2 of them in because nothing really crazy happened so far with this one. But this is the industrial park, and they did a geophysical survey on this one, and I think it got a clean bill of health as well. But it used to be an old Texaco fuel site, so that's why they wanted to look at that deeper. And like I said, it ended up being clean, I believe. But yeah, I guess that's what brownfields are all about, looking at these different sites and trying to redevelop them and put them to good use instead of just letting them sit there, or questions about contamination. But hopefully that was an okay introduction.
That was a great introduction.
Probably rambled a little bit, but
That is quite all right. And I will say, we recently took a site visit down and saw the hotel building. And I first did not notice the people painted in the windows. And then I'd noticed the people painted in the windows. And it was a little odd. I will say that it caught me off guard.
Yeah.
It really caught me off guard there.
It's neat though. It's cool.
But it is. It was really cool. I'm not sure if Blake has joined us. He had an emergency there at home he had to attend to. So we'll give him just a second. Blake, are you still with us, or do you have to step away? I think he may not be with us right now. We'll come back to Blake for an introduction, but I want to circle back to something that both Brendan and Susanna sort of mentioned as they were doing their introductions, and they both mentioned sort of coalitions of people that have came together. Whether we're calling them coalitions or whether we call them grant partners or regional partners, you both sort of alluded to that, one in the Tri-Cities and one sort of this coalition between the city and county. And I would love to invite either Brendan or Susanna to share, can you tell us a little bit more about that coalition, maybe how it came together, sort of what their charge is? Is it just related to brownfields, or are these sort of larger community organizations or coalitions that the brownfield program fits within their bigger picture? Susanna, go ahead. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes. I was also going to lower my hand. We were really blessed that the Tri-Cities has been working with Bobby Gothard, who is with their Main Street group for some time. She's a dynamo. She's very much behind improvements in the Tri-Cities area. And the Portal 31 had already been developed by the time we got up to them. And so the individual city officials, the mayors and the city council members in both primarily Lynch and Benham were on board with the different changes. And also there's been a strong level of support coming from the county judge executive, which has really been helpful. He's not been so much involved closely in the planning, but he has tracked it closely and kept up with what is going on. And so anytime that we needed information, or anytime that we were trying to get a handle on plans going forward, they had that information. And that was so key. These people thought about long-term goals for quite a while before we sent in this application. So it helped us by giving us a strong story to tell in the narrative of the application. And it also helped us to show other communities what planning will do for you and that kind of thing. And it gives us visioning in terms of the ad. I am primarily a grant writer and then a grant manager. And so one of the things that I like to do is think long-term on any of our projects. And they were so clear about what they were seeing coming on that I was able to envision what funding opportunities would be there for them at the different places along the path to where they wanted to be when all was said and done. So having a cohesive group that drew from several different disciplines, both private and public officials at different levels, and having people who get along and who share a vision has really been important for us and will continue to be ongoing, I think.
Thank you. And Brendan, I know you prefaced that you're fairly new, and I want to acknowledge that. I don't want to put you on the hot seat too much. I think in a lot of, over the pandemic, we've seen that happen a lot. We've had a lot of turnover at local area development districts and also at the state with our Brownfield office. So in some ways, we're all learning together around this program. But you had mentioned a coalition sort of between the city and county. I also know that local extension has been involved there, sort of on the ground level. Could you speak to sort of that coalition a little bit? But then I want to circle back to both of you around this idea of storytelling and vision creating to sort of see how those coalitions have really sort of help push both of those.
To Susanna's point about having different people from, the private public sector, obviously we have the judge, the county judge executive on there, and we even had a change in the middle of it this last election cycle, a new judge come in and everything. And we have the mayor, obviously. But I think one of the best parts is, like she was saying, we also have a person, I think they're actually a participant in here, from the county IDA. So that's really good to have someone like that, the industrial sector in there. And then we also have a person who is part of this committee. It's just a local committee, all dealing with the beautification of the city, maybe putting signs up and saying, welcome to our city, that looks good and inviting. And so that is the one thing that I've always noticed is having people like that on the coalition helps tenfold. People who from different sectors who all care and they all come together and they all want the same thing. And yeah, that's what I can say.
Great. No, I appreciate that. And sort of to circle back to both of you around this idea of coalitions, could you just speak a little bit to sort of maybe how you've seen those different parties or multiple stakeholders be able to approach visions? I think, what you just said, Brendan, was interesting, right? It's important, this idea of beautification, because there are some people who get into this sort of project type because they're interested in addressing the dilapidated or abandoned or underutilized buildings that are kind of that
Blighted.
elephant on Main Street, right? That you always see and you always wish we could do something with. Some people join the Brownfield redevelopment process because they're thinking about industrial development or jobs or that economic base. And I'll open it up to both of you all while we wait for Blake to join us again. But do you see sort of those different interests come to the surface in these conversations as it creates really a more unified vision, or are there conflict points that that you all have had to kind of work through?
I have had some conflict in terms of, I know it's encouraged to get realtors, people from the realty side of things in on these meetings and the community discussions. And I've noticed that a lot of people that come from that background don't necessarily see all of the benefits of brownfields. So that would be the only real conflict that I could speak to. But for the most part, it seems very cohesive and they all come together for one thing. Not really too much conflict, but it's all about making their community better, whether it's through economic, like the industrial side, or making things just look better. Because if you have a square like the courthouse square in Burkesville that looks blighted and dilapidated, like you said, it's just not very welcoming. It doesn't say, hey, stay here, stop by. But so no, I think most of them just come together and they all see the same vision in terms of that, in my case.
Susanna, would you like to share anything? I know you, when we spoke earlier, we were talking about the idea of storytelling and creating that narrative. And I would love to hear a little bit more about how each of those different stakeholders may have a different interest, whether it be beautification or economic development, and how all of those come together to create that bigger vision.
Well, there were several things at play for the Benham and Lynch redevelopment that we've been looking at, and we have other properties within both towns that we are working with, although I've mentioned mostly the one across from Portal 31. But before we became involved, there was a great interest in encouraging economic development in the area, because as I mentioned, the coal industry is, for most intents and purposes, gone. And people need jobs. And tobacco has also left the region. That was a source of a lot of dollars in the pocket of small farmers and so forth. So the most immediate way to get money into the community and to start improving the appearance of the town is to do something like go in with a brownfields program to determine where there are contaminants and to clean those up. And then you have the opportunity to start actual redevelopment and to go through visioning about specifically what that would look like. Now, in terms of people's different goals, I know that some people are very much driven by the economics. They want more money coming into the community in the form of tourists who will in turn spend their dollars there. There will be local jobs. And while the jobs that tourism brings in are typically not high paying, having a community that is attractive and that people want to visit is a good place to start in terms of bringing in additional economic development. There is also concern about the history of the community. It has a very rich history with the coal industry. Now, Hazard is not in our district, but it's close by. Just to give you an example, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1940s, when it had the highest population, it was in the realm of 100,000 individuals. And now it's back down below 20, I believe. And so Benham and Lynch, which were both coal towns, Cumberland, as I mentioned, was a market town and wasn't built by the coal companies themselves. Likewise had very large populations that have, for the most part, had to, individuals have had to go somewhere else to seek jobs. So there's an interest in preserving that history and preserving an understanding of the important role that that community played during a pivotal part in our nation's history. So they want to connect to that. And then also just the beautification element, because really anybody who's driven by a coal mining site is well aware that it is not the most beautiful landscape. So all of those pieces came together to build a story of what this community was trying to do, and gave them a starting place. This is the abandoned parts that we have as kind of their starting place. And it told the story of why that community was worth preserving, which was the history and the need for economic development. And then they had a vision of how to achieve what they were interested in doing. So all of those pieces came together to make a compelling story for us to tell in the application, with a huge part of that being the focus on what the future would be, because the federal government typically isn't interested in pouring money down a rabbit hole. They want to know that the dollars they put in are going to result in real change and real economic value for the communities that they're helping. And I think all the different elements for the Benham and Lynch communities came together really well to help us build that story, that narrative, and to have varied pieces. It has 3 or 4 legs to stand on when you start looking at the history and the ways to build the story. So I think we were really fortunate. We did include other sites in our application, but those were mostly individual sites. And the primary story was built from the Benham Lynch connection.
Great. Well, thank you, Suzanne. And I think I'm going to circle back to some of those points that you were bringing up. And I think one is that this idea that, the federal government doesn't want to be an investor in a project that they're not compelled to fund, and that they're also not interested in being the sole investor, which is why the cost share and sort of getting that story or contributing to that long-term future vision prior and having that story and that narrative to be able to tell can make a good application a very competitive application. But before we move on, I want to bring Blake into the conversation here. He's been able to join us. Blake, would you mind sort of unmuting and if you have video, please feel free to turn your video on if you can. I believe you should be able to. And I'm gonna share the screen with a couple of the slides that you had shared, and really just provide us an introduction. Tell us where you're working, kind of some of the things you're working on. And I'm going to circle back to some of the conversations that have came up in the topics, just to sort of touch base with you to see if there's anything that you'd like to add to it. Okay.
Yeah, so sorry for my delay. I appreciate you skipping over me there for a minute. So I'm in I'm out of Owensboro with the Green River Area Development District, and as you can see on here, we've really just been getting started with the Brownfield program. So Grad has done some things in the past. The Owensboro Riverfront, back where the Executive Inn used to be, they tore it down, and before the Executive Inn was built there, it was a manufactured gas facility, and it had a marina, and so they had some on-site storage tanks, and the city invested $100 million, and the EPA, it was declared a brownfield site, and it was one of the more successful projects in the Grad region. But we've done everything from that to the Henderson Riverport, was a manufacturing facility for World War II ordnance, and there were a lot of items discovered there during that reclamation project that had to be disposed of as hazardous waste, and I wasn't here for that, but my predecessor was, and just going back and reading through the what they had to do kind of scared me for the Brownfield program. But we were just awarded a grant through the EPA for our first area-wide assessment grant, and what we're going to do with that is really focus on a couple of our coal communities, or historical coal communities. I mean, like many areas of the eastern and western Kentucky, coal has powered our economy since the 1800s, and the loss of coal, and we still have 1,200 people employed in coal mines here and produce a ton of coal, but it is the reduced demand has really hurt our economy, our workforce, our people who live here. So a couple of the towns who have always been centered around coal production, they always had a mine right outside of town, or a mine shaft right outside of town, and all the businesses in town were dependent upon that. So when the coal dried up, all those businesses dried up, and so we're going to really focus on some strategic position or strategic places in those towns with that project. That's, like I say, we just got awarded. We're doing the grant agreement now, and so after those, we partner with a consultant, and those places are assessed. We're hoping that we're able to apply for future brownfield cleanup grants after we have those properties assessed. But what you're seeing on the screen is a really cool project that we're just getting started on. This is it was a Big Rivers Electric coal generation facility in Hancock County, right there on the Ohio River. It is now closed, and it is being cleaned up. So we've been working with Eric and the Brownfields team at the state for the past year, following that generation plant closing. And there are a couple of coal ash ponds on this property, and but it is primed for development. I mean, they have 14 mooring docks on the existing in the river, and but we're just not sure what the ground is going to look like. And one really neat thing that we've done on this property, and like I say, it's in its final stages of cleanup before we can actually start the brownfield assessment portion. But Big Rivers has partnered with us, and Hancock County, and Hancock County Economic Development and IDA, because they're not only going to gift this property, they're also going to gift $10 million towards the any cleanup that is needed, depending on whether those ash ponds are capped or, cleaned up, whatever. And so they've been a excellent partner in this endeavor so far. And so it's a really neat project that is coming down the track. And yeah, that's it. It's just about 700 acres right on the river, ready for development. So yeah.
And here's a couple statistics. I did not switch while you were talking, Blake, but here are a couple of the statistics I think that you had mentioned.
Yeah.
A really impressive site. And I really want to draw attention to the partners. While you were away, we were sort of talking about our coalitions that have came together on the ground to sort of really promote and push some of these projects forward. You mentioned some great partners that you all are working with, your industrial development folks, the big rivers. I mean, it's amazing to hear that there's a $10 million gift kind of waiting. That is incredibly special, to move these sorts of projects forward. But is there anything else that you'd like to share around the coalition itself and the way that came together, or what their shared vision is? Is it about cleaning up and mitigating this site? Is it about sort of economic development? Are there other things that have brought folks to the table, and how were they sort of energized or really brought forward to start focusing on these opportunities?
Yeah, so Big Rivers has been a partner for our region, as long as they've been in existence since the 70s, and they are vested and want to see economic development, in the county and in the area. I mean, that Big Rivers Coleman site was a employer of very, very well-paid individuals for decades, and it provided a lot of good growth and stability in our region, not just in Hancock County, but all the neighboring counties and Indiana across the river there. And so they've always been on board, and not only do they want to get it cleaned up and get the site returned to usable space. I mean, they want to see economic development on that site, because they're still providing electricity to the area, and in any potential economic development there. I mean, that just helps them and in their future as well. So that's kind of how it came about. We have a very involved economic development corporation that that involves all of our 7 county economic development partners and bankers and small business owners, and we meet on a monthly basis, and we're really focused, and they're really focused. We're really fortunate that they all want to see the rising tide, and what's good for the region is good for everybody, and so they're really focused on that at a regional level, and kind of breaking down those silos that as long as it existed, they're really focused on that. So we're really fortunate with the public and private partnership, and like somebody said earlier, I mean, that private investment is key to gaining federal investment. They want projects that are going to get funded, that are going to work, that are going to be viable. And the more private and local investment buy-in that we can get, and more regional partners that we can get, the more attractive our funding applications look.
Yeah. And I'm going to circle back to the funding applications, because I believe each of you have mentioned or referenced assessment grants. And Susanna specifically talked about sort of the process of writing that grant and using the narrative of the story and the partners to make a compelling story for that. But one question I would love for you all to sort of speak to is, as you're, you see a brownfield funding opportunity, a regional or a community assessment grant, what's the next step? you know, in your mind as an organization, you know, how do you know what sites you're going to include in that assessment grant? Because they do ask for some preliminary site, right? They ask for some preliminary site information, but how do you go about making that judgment call around which sites are included in that assessment, which ones may not? Whether it's, you know, viable partners who have an interest or are vested, whether it's sites that you all have deemed as really impactful or catalyst projects like Brendan had mentioned. And Blake, you're unmuted, so I'm gonna let you sort of talk to that first about, you know, how do we prioritize all of the pieces and the sites in those community assessment grants as we start to write them?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, it was a difficult and painstaking process to identify some of those specific, you know, properties, because, you know, the EPA, they want specific areas mentioned. I mean, they want properties that are you know, going to be viable moving forward, and so for us, it was all about being able to tell a story, you know, about the history of coal and the loss of coal, and how we approached it is, you know, we just involved the local officials, the county judges, our mayors, and we really narrowed it down to a couple of areas in our hardest hit coal towns and coal counties, because there were one, availability of properties, and two, local officials were all about it. You know, and they were had a vested interest in it, you know, a vested interest in, you know, seeing what is available after assessing these properties. And that's really how we did it. It was kind of a pick and choose thing, you know. At the end, we just kind of had to go with what we had the best story to tell on, and, you know, the most buy-in we had from our local officials, because it is a limited grant, you know, and they can't do every, you know, town and every, you know, even if we took one, you know, we have 31 entities, you know, even if they took one, that's still way too many. So it was a painstaking process, but for that, we just went with what told the story the best and what was going to be the most impactful for that local area.
Great. And I want to touch on something that you said and just draw attention to it for everyone else attending. You know, but Blake just mentioned that, you know, one of the things that helped them make that call was it was local elected officials and their communities that were really vested, that were interested. And it's one of the things that we mentioned in our previous webinar, was that when we think about these grants, places where municipalities have made some sense of investment, even if it's just in having conversations about future vision and redevelopment, that is an investment that the government is interested in seeing, that there is some sort of investment happening, whether it's money on the table or sort of money and technical assistance and planning. The other thing that I want to uplift that Blake just said was this idea of the communities you all were serving as some of the hardest hit in sort of the decline of the coal economy. And I want to draw attention to a new focus with the Brownfield money and much of the federal money that is heading to our community through the Commonwealth, through the bipartisan infrastructure law signed through the federal government last year. And there is a very specific focus on serving under-resourced and underutilized, or sort of under-resourced and underserved communities. So I think, you know, the way that you all approach that, Blake, really fit within their priorities, that they have started to shift some of those funding paradigms, that they really want to see that money go to communities that haven't received it in the past, that could really use it and maybe have been looked over with previous grant applications. So, you know, just wanted to uplift a couple of things that you mentioned there, because I do believe it's really important as we think about how do we really make our applications as competitive as possible. And part of it is thinking about those big impact projects. Part of it is thinking about who hasn't been served, how can we better serve them. And I think the other piece that we've heard about is where are people really vested, interested, or have kind of some skin in the game, if you will, around wanting to see that transpire. Susanna, I'm going to turn it over to you if you're okay. to talk a little bit about, as you all were working on your assessment grant there in Harlan and in the region that you all serve, how did you all start to prioritize those sites, really to create a cohesive message? Was it similar to what Blake said, or were there other things at play with you all?
Well, as I mentioned, we have the initial thought was the set of needs in Benham and Lynch. We were aware of that. We were aware of their wanting to move forward with that. We understood the likelihood of contamination there, given the age of the buildings and the work that was done in the area, that there would likely be contamination. So that was where we went initially. And then we also made a presentation about brownfields to our board. All of the county judges, executive, and mayors are members of our board, and we also have some magistrates and city council members and private citizens who attend our board meeting. So we asked them for some suggestions, and we did have a few that came up from that perspective. We're still in the process of collecting ideas now, but initially when we were trying to say, who are we going to put actually in the application, that was where we went, where we knew that there was already work and visioning going on, and going to our public officials, who each of whom knows their community intimately. So that helped us a lot in terms of choosing what we were going to do, and also looking at the communities that had the greatest need. That was likewise a concern, because we have a lot of communities that are just destitute. One of our counties, Clay County, which also happens to be where I was born and raised, is consistently listed in the top 25 worst counties in the nation. And some of our other counties are not that far from that. And so that was part of the story that we were telling, that not just that this area, the Harlan Lynch Benham project, but the whole district in Eastern Kentucky as a whole, looking toward tourism and adventure tourism as an economic driver. And so we were able to pull in, we could say this specific project has already got feet on the ground and vision, but we know that this can also serve as a cornerstone for change throughout the area, with focus on tourism as an economic driver. And when other communities see success here, that they are more likely to be able to see something happening in their community. They can extrapolate the success of that project into their own communities and start looking at what resources they have that would help them to have similar success.
No, that makes complete sense. I'm going to sort of transition us a little bit. We've been talking about sort of working with coalitions and our community partners. We've also, we know just from talking through and sort of sharing this and working in this field, that sometimes these projects can be quite complicated. And in particular, when we're managing federal grants or state grants, that adds an extra layer of complication. And I would love to sort of open it up for all of you all to discuss, what are, as you think about those conversations that you've had with coalitions, or even yourself as you've tried to sort of navigate the process, where do you often find the most confusion? And honestly, and I will be very frank about the reason I'm asking this is, as we start to move forward and provide more technical assistance and more support, not just for communities, but for organizations and entities that are supporting communities with this sort of redevelopment opportunity, I also want to be informed on where some of that confusion lies, so that we can provide more appropriate resources and support, and really help overcome some of that. So whether it's something that still confuses you, or something that you often see as a difficult topic to approach in these processes, I'd love to hear you all talk about that. And Suzanne, I see you have your hand raised, so I'll turn it over to you first. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There you go.
My computer decided to get cranky there for a second, so I had to dig for it. One of the biggest challenges that we face, continue to face as we work on this project, is just a lack of knowledge about what brownfields even are. And I can be sympathetic with that, because until I started writing the application, I wasn't real sure what it was myself. And also the fact that we have an assessment grant, which in the final analysis is just collecting information. The output is reports. There's no change on the ground occurring as a result of this funding. And we've had difficulty both explaining to people that this is not cleanup or renovation money, and also explaining to them why the assessments are important. Because it's a fairly esoteric idea. We're going to come in and tell you whether or not there's contamination in your soil or your building, even though you could tell us right now, sitting on the front porch, that you do have asbestos in your building. But we're going to send somebody in and pay them a lot of money to write that in a report. And so there's a question of, why are you spending this huge pile of money, and then at the end of it, we don't have anything we can put our hand on that's changed? So that is a struggle, and explain to them that that the EPA requires it before you could even apply for a cleanup grant. So we have to talk about the process. And so I think that was one of our biggest challenges, just explaining what it was, why we're not spending money on cleanup or renovations with this funding, and then why it's important to do the assessments.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I've often shared, thinking about the assessment grants, whether you move buildings into phase 1 or phase 2, where you're confirming whether or not you have that asbestos or that lead paint or some other contaminant. There really isn't a tangible thing that you can walk away with. But the way that I often try to describe it and help people understand is that it is a part of the due diligence of transferring that property. And it is one thing that can help reduce the liability and the risk for that next owner. In the same way that if you're buying a home, you may be interested in a termite inspection or a radon test, because those two things can really impact the home that you're investing a lot of money into. And that is the one sort of tangible and valuable piece that comes out of the assessment, beyond the knowledge, beyond sort of having a clear picture of what you may have to do in the redevelopment process to clean up appropriately. But I do like to think about going through that assessment process as part of the due diligence of investment. And that would be taking place whether or not it was funded by an EPA Brownfield grant, or if that was happening on the private market. And those things happen on the private market when that place is competitive. And in most of the underserved communities we're trying to focus on, we're not as competitive. And it's one of the reasons that we have seen sort of depopulation or deinvestment over time for a variety of reasons, whether it's a reliance on a particular industry that's waned or what have you. So I do want to uplift that even in those moments when it's hard to see a tangible thing, we really do have to think about the value of that knowledge and how it fits within that process. But Brendan, I saw you turned on your video. I'm going to turn it over to you. And is there anything that you'd like to add around, confusion or places that you've seen that folks really kind of struggle to fully comprehend or understand the Brownfield program or process?
Yeah, I think Susanna hit the nail on the head. I mean, perfectly for what I was going to say. That's by far the biggest issue I've ran into every time you talk to a property owner. That's exactly what Susanna said. And in terms of explaining it to them that, the due diligence thing, I always get met with, this could open up a can of worms, that we didn't know was here, and now we have to deal with it, and it's really hurting me. And to be honest, in my lack of experience here, I don't think I know a really good way to answer that to them. So that'd be awesome if Blake or Susanna knows a good way to explain that to them or counter.
Yeah. And that may be something that we can also talk about. I think trying to figure out how to individualize those messages. And I know anyone in this world, in this work that has dealt with property owners, they're a mixed bag, just like all of our neighbors and humans, right? Some of them are altruistic, some of them are not. Some of them are very focused on the bottom line. Some of them are risk-based in their assessments of what they're going to do. Some of them have nostalgia connected to their buildings that they may not want to sell or transfer. They may have grandiose visions of what that site could be without the capital to make it a reality. So I think, it is difficult when we work with property owners, because in the Brownfield process, right, there is that requirement that within that process, there's that transfer of property ownership. It is critical to the Brownfield program and the Brownfield sort of implementation process that there is that transfer. That's essentially where that liability protection falls into. Susanna, I'm going to circle back to you. I'm going to give Blake an opportunity to address this question around, any confusion he may have encountered or questions that partners often have that they faced as they've gone through this assessment. Then I'll come back to you, Susanna.
Yeah, we get the same confusion that Brendan and Susanna get, around that liability and opening up. A lot of them are hesitant, especially if the history is questioned. They're not 100% familiar with the history of the building or the site. They're afraid to turn over the ground if it were, and afraid for the government to get involved. So we run into that a lot. But one thing that we really have to educate our local officials on and our local IDAs and economic development is the importance of the local government and the IDA getting involved. If they can get involved and if the county's able to purchase that property or the IDA, or gifted that property, it allows us to, kind of maintain a little control, but also, it may be used as an incentive, to lure somebody there. I mean, the utilities are already there, and so, if you can help the IDA or the county to understand, that even if you gift the property, I mean, it's still going to, be a return on your dollar. And it's important for them to get involved. And a lot of times the property owners are more comfortable, instead of just transferring ownership directly to another individual. If the local IDA or the county is, can serve as a broker or kind of escrow, for lack of a better term. But our biggest confusion and some of these projects are enormous, and we do various funding from various partners and local, state, federal, and each funding source will fund different portions of the project. And one we're working on, I mean, several utility lines are going to have to be increased in size, and so we need several $1 million for that portion, and counting the property as an in-kind contribution by the city or county, and incorporating that in, and just managing all these different funding sources and the timeline. All elected officials want the timeline to be yesterday, and with the federal government, it just doesn't work like that, and they have certain requirements that have to be met, and you're going to have to put some money out to be able to get a return on that. A lot of things like the phase 1 brownfield, all that stuff that that you can apply for them to come and do it, but you're going to have some skin in the game early on to be able to propel those properties forward.
Thanks, Blake. One thing I want to sort of lift up here that you mentioned is, especially with your site, is that I think a big selling point is that those utilities are already there. And that's one thing that we often promote brownfields for as a potential benefit for redevelopment, is that in many places, the brownfields that we're talking about are located in really competitive locations. They're either at great intersections, downtowns, courthouse squares, on major roadways. They're often connected to existing infrastructure, whether that be water, sewer, electric, because of those industrial practices, or they're just their commercial setting. If we're talking about a bank, or we're talking about a dry cleaner or a gas station, these sites are located in competitive areas within their communities, and they're usually high traffic areas, which often also contribute to that idea of just like, I wish we could do something with that old abandoned or vacant gas station I see driving down the road every day. So I just want to uplift that idea as well, that one of the benefits we often see is that they are so closely related and connected to existing infrastructure. Suzanne, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you had something that you were wanting to add to this bigger conversation around
Yes,
how do we talk to property owners?
Just wanted to quickly respond to what Brendan was saying about some ways to approach property owners. One of the things is that's one of the values of a coalition or a team on the ground in the communities themselves, because the likelihood that at least some of those people know the property owner that you're talking to is fairly high. And so you can ask them to go with you or ask them to speak to that person themselves. And that's one way to approach it. And another thing also is, why do you, Brendan, or your team think that property should be mitigated? And that is a reason that you can give to them. If the only reason that you think it needs to be mitigated is because you need more to mitigate, to spend all your money, then that may not be a compelling reason for them. But if you are going and saying, well, we're already doing these over here, or we have a vision that would include improvements on your property, those kinds of things, that might be more compelling. And something else that is important is making it clear to private owners that they won't be able to get cleanup grants. That was something that we had to make sure that folks knew up front. We can do phase 1s, and in some cases phase 2s on private property, but they cannot get EPA cleanup grants. And so they need to be aware of that up front when they're making the initial decision, and not have that phase 2 assessment saying you've got all this contamination And then suddenly their only option for mitigating it is out of their pocket, and they're going to be hostile about that.
That hurts when we start to dig into that wallet on these sorts of projects. It can hurt. Blake's talking millions of dollars, right, for little subsections of elements here. So thank you so much, Susanna. I want to remind our guests and our attendees, if you have questions, please feel free to add those into the Q&A box, and we're going to circle back to those here momentarily. I've got a couple more topics that I want to try to cover over the next few minutes. We may wrap up just a little bit early today, but one question that I do have for our panel is, do you all or does the ad district keep any sort of database of existing abandoned properties or blighted or vacant properties, whether or not they're brownfields or not, but those properties of interest that are in sites that you're kind of targeting redevelopment? And if not, would having that type of inventory make your work a little bit easier as you're moving forward in some of these projects? And I'll let whoever would like to unmute themselves. Brendan, go ahead.
I was just going to say we don't, but that is a great idea. Thank you for mentioning it. So I will bring that up and let Blake go. I think Blake might want to talk.
I was just going to say that, so Governor Beshear kind of started a conversation last year with the ad districts and the Economic Development Cabinet, and we presented, a few select sites to him and the team at the cabinet early last year in 22, and that kind of started us on the trajectory of understanding that we did not have a database or any kind of a list. I mean, 90% of our area is very rural. There's an excellent economic developers, in each area that kind of know their location, but we didn't have a comprehensive list, and some of our counties don't even have an economic developer. The judge serves as the economic developer for the county, and developing that list has been high on our to-do list, and we've kind of just started doing that. We got some of the properties for our assessment application from that list, but in addition to the properties on Zoom Prospector, we need some potential sites for development, not only economic development but community development. There's some of our smaller cities, there's a ton of money available for parks and recreation and splash pads and things such as that, and having a list of those sites, and that mainly we target sites who have willing property owners who want to see it back on the tax rolls, and who want to unload the property. A ton of our land is farmland, but there are a plethora of sites that are available if you just know who to talk to, and that's been a struggle somewhat, but it is we don't have the capacity to do it like we should, and I wish that was different. I think you could do a lot of good just devoting one person to working on this and developing it, but we do so many different projects and programs that we just don't have the capacity like is needed to develop that. But comprehensive list of those properties and would be very, very beneficial to all of your partners, not just the ad district, but all of your partners.
Thank you. And one of the reasons that I asked that question is, as a part of this new partnership with CEDIK and the Brownfield program here in Kentucky, I'm going to be offering through our organization some more technical assistance than maybe has been available on the ground in the past. And one of the things that I am really interested in is sort of low cost assessments of mapping. And I love processes where communities or those coalitions of partners can get together and do engaged assessments of their communities and start to gather some of that information and start to put them on maps, start to collect some of that information that would later then be used in an application, or if it's not a brownfield, could potentially be used in some sort of property transfer or marketability for that property, to get that property back on the tax rolls and sort of serving its community in the way that it may have in the past. So we're going to be doing some more webinars. I'm going to probably do one specifically on different types of engaged assessment opportunities, including low-cost mapping that we can do. I'm going to highlight some of the work that was done in Harlan County as a part of their downtown revitalization work that really did start to shift some conversations and narratives around vacant or underutilized property to generate investment. So while I'm not surprised that we don't have that capacity, I am energized to know that it could be beneficial. That is something that could most certainly add value to the work that you all are doing at your ad districts. Susanna, would you like to sort of speak to this at all? You know, do you all have any kind of ongoing inventory of buildings or sites, or are you all kind of in the same boat as our other two panelists, where you wish you had that?
Pretty much in the same boat. One of the things that has been on my mind since we began is we're going to be collecting information on potential brownfield sites to be assessed during the whole time of our grant. And part of what we want to do is build an inventory like that. Our hope is that if the properties are out there, when this grant is over, we will have already accumulated a sufficient backlog, if you will, to where then we can move straight into an application for another assessment grant. As long as this additional money is available and there's a need in our communities, we want to do everything we can to take advantage of it.
Right. Thank you. Since we don't have any Q&A, I was going to stop about 15 minutes till the end of the webinar to take any questions. Since we don't have any, I'm going to go ahead and move on. I've got one last question that I've been holding on to, waiting in case we got to this point in the webinar. But I would love to know, you know, what resources or support do you all need at the area development districts to make this work a little bit easier for you? Or are there resources that you wish were available to the communities that you're serving that could also help them be more competitive or more successful in these brownfield processes? So again, anything that resources or support that you all could use at the area development district, or support or resources that the communities you serve could use to make these processes more competitive or more successful. And I'll let whoever wants to unmute themselves first take the lead here.
I guess I'll start. One thing that helps us tremendously is our other ad districts. And, you know, in our partners at the state. I mean, you know, with the cabinet, I think Jenny gets. I think I saw her on here earlier. I'm not sure she's still on there, but I'll send her just ridiculous emails, and she'll answer any ridiculous question I have. So, you know, for us, just knowing the right person to call and having a support network. I mean, I've wrote down several notes here that Susanna and Brendan are doing already that you know, help tremendously. And you know, we do a ton of different programs where we work with our other counterparts, you know, at the ad districts already. And something really cool that we've been doing is there's a interagency working group on coal impacted communities, and it's a nationwide group, but you know, we meet regularly to talk about and learn from one another. So I think learning best practices and, you know, just kind of having that support group or like a resource center for potential, where you can go and see best practices and past success stories. And I know the state has, a great website with some success stories and items on there, but places you can go and look at, frequently asked questions and just different templates or resources for use, I think would be the most helpful for us.
Right. Thanks, Blake. Brendan or Susanna, anything that you'd like to add, either resources that could really benefit you or support you or the communities you serve?
If I could jump in here, then I think one of the issues that we deal with, and we've all kind of touched on this in the process, is capacity in our local communities. Just generally people who understand what it takes to get and manage a grant. And in our communities, typically our public officials are looking to the next election. They're not looking to 10 years from now. And I think the examples that you see in Harlan County are good to consider. Bobby Gothard and the Main Street group over in Cumberland, Benjamin Lynch, there is a person who is pushing it and who is leading the charge. And Dan Mobley, who's the county judge executive, he is also very engaged. And while he doesn't necessarily participate that much in the day-to-day, he's very much behind it and keeps on top of what's going on, so he's able to speak to it if it comes up. And so something that would be useful perhaps from you all would be going into different communities and holding a seminar or something about how to take leadership in the community to prepare it to be able to do planning, to be able to do, to lay the foundation for grants and so forth. One of the snags that we hit a lot, not on this project because the ad is the one with the grant here, but a lot of our smaller communities struggle to pay for annual audits, and you can't get a grant without an annual audit. And sometimes they don't even know that. And so they come to you when we really want this grant, or you have a new mayor, we really want this grant. Well, you're going to have to produce 7 years of audits before we can write anything for you. And just not knowing how to prepare the communities and to take leadership on preparing the community to get grants, I think is huge.
Thanks, Susanna. Brendan, would you like to add anything to this conversation around, what resources could best support you or those you serve?
I agree with both of them and everything they said, but what Blake said about the ads working together, I would love to talk to Blake and Susanna and the other ads about that. I think that would help a lot. And also I would just like to throw in, it doesn't just have to be the panelists, but the national convention, I think this year it's up in Detroit. I went to the one last year in OKC. I knew absolutely nothing. It was like right when I figured out I was taking over for the person that had it before, but it was a good experience. It was a great experience, and I'm hoping to go back again this year. But I think that's a great place to go if you want information and everything like that, and networking.
Yeah, and I was going to say I just completed my registration last week for the national conference. I think Susanna and I spoke about it earlier today about the national conference, and I would certainly invite us. If there is a Kentucky contingent at the Brownfield Conference, it would be nice for us to get together and sort of maybe initiate some networking, even if it's breaking bread or having a dinner together one evening, just to do that. The other thing that I can certainly think about with our state partners as a part of our new partnership is really facilitating or bringing together ad district partners to have an area development district specific conversation around brownfields and best practices, how we can support ourselves. So I've stuck a pin in that on my notes as something I'm going to circle back to since you all mentioned that. But before we get off, I do want to bring attention to a question that was brought forward, really kind of a question and an opportunity that Jennifer shared. Want to make sure our panelists see it, where we were talking about our inventory, and she shared that the Cabinet for Economic Development has the Zoom Prospector website where they list the inventory of available sites and buildings, and they do have the capability to list or designate brownfield sites on that. So that may be an opportunity we would want to explore moving forward with all of our brownfield sites, perhaps as a best practice to get them in front of as many people as possible. So Jennifer, thank you so much for that comment. I've taken note of that as well, and may follow up on that with you just to chat about it a little bit. But we have reached the really the end of the webinar here. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and their commitment to join us today. I want to thank our panelists, Brendan, Blake, and Susanna, for joining us today. It has been a great conversation. Just to remind myself and the attendees of some of the topics that came up today. You know, we talked about the importance of coalitions and the importance of networks as they sort of build and help create the narratives that become part of those proposals. It is incredibly important for us to have those visions for what they're going to be, so that we don't feel like, or that the reviewer of our grants feel like we're just throwing darts at a map. That any of that groundwork that we can do prior to submitting those applications make them way more competitive. That partners are incredibly important, whether we're talking about area development district partners or whether we're talking about elected leaders, nonprofits, or philanthropic partners. That the assessment grant really is the first step in a lot of ways, but there are some work that we can do leading up to that assessment grant, whether it be getting that inventory or doing the mapping, starting to collect some of that information with our partners together. And then lastly, the idea that property owners do play a key role in this process, where while we may be resource providers and kind of helping shepherd the process, in a lot of ways, there are people that we serve that are also critical to these processes, including the property owners, regulatory agencies, and all of those other entities that can help us overcome some of those confusion points around liability or opening up that can of worms, helping property owners best understand how to navigate this alongside us. The idea that these sites are really valuable, not just because of their redevelopment potential, but oftentimes because of their geographic locations in our communities. So, you know, I could ramble on and on about some of the really important pieces that we've touched on today. We could talk a lot more about this. It's going to be the reason that we continue to have these webinars in the future, monthly. Again, I want to plug our upcoming webinar. You would register at the same site that you registered for this one at, and when we upload this video, I will include that link to register for our revitalization long game, where we'll hear from the folks in Beattyville as they sort of describe how this revitalization of their downtown is being capped off with a cleanup grant. But I also want to plug an upcoming opportunity that myself and our partners at the state are organizing right now. The end of October, please save the date if you're interested, October 29th and October 30th. We're going to be hosting a Brownfield boot camp in Georgetown, Kentucky. It's going to be a 2-day event split in two. Each day is sort of for a different audience. The first day we're targeting folks who may want that introductory piece. The second day we're hoping to get a little bit deeper into the nuts and bolts of the Brownfield process. we'll be getting those save the dates out and a little bit more information soon. But, if that may be something that you're interested in, please mark it on your calendar or pencil it in. And I will send that out as soon as we get this recording sort of published on our YouTube page. So again, thank you to all of the attendees who took their time out of their day to join us today. Thank you to the panelists for your time today. And like I said, we will be following up very soon to share this recording along with previous recordings and any other resources that may have been mentioned as a part of today's webinar. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all so much. And we'll see you hopefully next month.
Thanks, Shane.
Take care, Brendan.
See you.